Warning. Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. These mountains are 480 million years old, and they've spent every second of that time learning how to hide bodies. The Appalachian Mountains horror stories you're about to hear aren't just local legends whispered over a campfire. They are documented encounters from the men and women who wear the badge and patrol the deepest dead zones of the American wilderness. First, a ranger in the middle of a lethal polar vortex comes face to face with two children who have obsidian black eyes and don't produce a single wisp of breath in the freezing air. Next, an officer working a graveyard shift is terrorized when an unplugged rotary evidence phone starts ringing with a wet voice whispering from the vents. Finally, a search and rescue mission for a missing Girl Scout troop leads to a limestone ritual site where the girls are found in a perfect geometric shape that defies logic. If you're sitting in the dark right now, you might want to check the locks, because in these woods, missing isn't just a status, it's an outcome. Smash that like button and subscribe to join the Shadow Dwellers. You don't want to face what's coming next alone. January 31st, 2019. You might remember the news reports. They called it the Polar Vortex. Down here in the South, we didn't have the infrastructure for it. We just had the cold. Callum worked as a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains. He had seen storms that snapped trees like toothpicks and floods that washed away entire roads. But that Thursday evening was different. The temperature bottomed out at 5 degrees below zero. With the wind cutting through the valleys, it felt like 15 below. It was industrial-grade freezing. It was the kind of weather where machinery fails and batteries die in minutes. Callum sat in his patrol truck, a 2018 Ford F-250, idling at the entrance to Cades Cove. The dashboard clock read 5:14 p.m. It was dusk, and the sky was turning a dark, bruised purple. Inside the cab, the heater was blasting. The plastic dashboard made loud cracking noises every few minutes. It was expanding from the heat, fighting against the sub-zero vacuum right on the other side of the glass. Callum held his hands over the vents. He had been doing this job for 20 years, but he couldn't get the chill out of his bones. Headquarters had ordered a Level 5 closure. That meant the park was officially shut down. The gates had to be locked, and the rescue teams were standing down. If you got stuck out here tonight, no one was coming to get you until the thaw. Diamond dust filled the air outside. It wasn't snowing, but the moisture in the air had frozen instantly into tiny ice crystals. They hung in the air, glittering like ground glass. It looked nice, but it was dangerous. It meant the air was cold enough to freeze your lungs. He had one job left: lock the main swing gate. Callum shifted the truck into park. The big diesel engine was loud beneath him, shaking the floorboards. He took a deep breath, grabbed his heavy Maglite flashlight, and opened the door. Winter hit him like a slap in the face. Walking out there felt like stepping into a wall of solid ice. He slammed the truck door, killing the engine noise, and stepped onto the asphalt. The valley was dead quiet. Usually you hear wind tearing through the trees or water moving in the creek. Tonight the creek was frozen solid. The trees were stiff. The only noise out there was his own boots crunching on the blacktop. It felt wrong, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. He walked to the heavy metal gate. His gloves were thick, but the iron bolt was so cold he could feel it through the leather. It was frozen stiff. He had to put his shoulder into it, grunting as he forced the metal rod to slide. Clang. The sound of the lock snapping shut echoed across the empty valley. It was too loud. Callum turned around to head back to the truck. He scanned the area out of habit. His eyes swept past the trees and settled on the road leading toward the John Oliver cabin. He stopped. About 40 yards away, standing right in the middle of the road, were two figures. Squinting, Callum tried to see through the gloom. The light was failing, but he could see them clearly against the gray woods. They were small, children, a boy and a girl, maybe 9 and 11 years old. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was a level 5 closure. No one was supposed to be here. He took a step forward. He tried to make sense of it. They weren't dressed for hiking. They weren't even dressed for winter. Both of them wore thin, dark hoodies with the hoods pulled up. Jeans, sneakers, no coats, no gloves. In -5 degrees, that was lethal. Frostbite sets in within 10 minutes. They should have been shivering. They should have been huddled together. "Hey!" Callum shouted. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "You kids shouldn't be out here. Where are your parents?" Shouting forced a massive cloud of white steam from his mouth. The condensation was so thick he had to wave it away to see them again. Those kids didn't move. They stood side by side, arms hanging limp. They didn't react to his voice. They just stood there. Callum grabbed his maglite. He hit the switch. A bright beam cut through the darkness, putting the two figures in a harsh spotlight. They were pale. Their skin looked like wax. Their mouths hung slightly open, slack-jawed. He watched their faces. He waited for them to squint against the bright light. He waited for them to cover their eyes. They did nothing. Then he saw it, the detail that made his blood run cold. Callum was panting from the cold, pumping out clouds of white fog with every breath. The air around his face was thick with it, but the air around the children was clear. Their mouths were open. The air was 5 below zero, but there was no steam, not a single wisp. They weren't holding their breath. They just weren't breathing. He took another step. He was 20 yards away now. The light hit them square in the face. Usually, when you shine a light in someone's eyes at night, the pupils shrink, or you get a red-eye reflection. Callum stared. The light washed over them, but their eyes didn't reflect anything. Where the white of the eye should have been, there was only darkness. From lid to lid, their eyes were solid, obsidian black. No iris, no pupil. Just two empty black holes absorbing the light. They stared right through him. It wasn't angry. It wasn't scared. It was nothing. Zero recognition. His brain tried to find a logical explanation. He dealt with facts. He didn't believe in ghost stories. Hypothermia, he thought. He remembered a medical briefing, fixed mydriasis. When the body goes into deep shock, the pupils can dilate fully. The eye looks black. That had to be it. These kids were freezing to death. Their brains were shutting down. "Hang on," Callum yelled. "Don't move. I'm calling for help." He spun around, he turned his back on them and sprinted to the truck. He needed the radio. He needed an ambulance. Yanking the door open, he grabbed the mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4, he shouted. "Code 3 medical at Cades Cove. 2 juveniles, severe hypothermia. Send EMS now." He dropped the mic. He didn't wait for a reply. He grabbed the emergency wool blanket from the back seat and spun around. "I've got blankets, just..." He stopped. The road was empty. His flashlight beam hit the yellow lines on the asphalt. It hit the trees in the distance, but the children were gone. Callum froze. He scanned the woods. "Hey, come back!" Silence, no running footsteps, no crunching leaves, just the wind. He ran to where they had been standing. He shined his light on the ground. There was a light dusting of frost on the road. He saw his own boot prints leading from the truck. But where the children had stood, where two people had been standing 30 seconds ago. The frost was perfect. No sneaker prints, no scuff marks, nothing. Callum stood alone in the dark. The diamond dust glittered in the light. He spun in a circle, checking the woods, but he knew he wouldn't find them. His radio crackled. Unit 4, copy. EMS is 40 minutes out. Confirm status? He looked at the empty road. He thought about those black eyes. He thought about the lungs that produced no steam in the freezing air. Callum walked back to the truck. He climbed inside and locked the door. He picked up the mic. His hand was shaking. Unit 4, he said. Cancel EMS. Disregard. I must have seen a deer. False alarm. Copy, Unit 4. Stay warm. Callum put the truck in gear. He didn't look in the mirror as he drove away. He turned the heater up as high as it would go, but he knew it wouldn't help. The cold was already inside. Blackwood Ranger Station always felt like a tomb on Tuesday nights. Pritchard sat at the heavy steel desk, rubbing his eyes. It was 2:14 a.m. Outside, winter wind whipped through the Douglas firs, dragging dead branches against the metal roof. Inside, the station smelled like lemon pledge and stale mildew. A large 7-Eleven coffee cup sat near his hand. He had bought it at the start of his shift, and by now, the hazelnut roast inside was separated and ice cold. He shifted in his chair. The standard issue Sig Sauer P226 dug into his hip. Most officers took their duty belts off for desk work, but Pritchard kept his on. The station sat 5 miles off Route 9, deep in the state park's dead zone. When you work alone in these woods, you stay armed. Tonight was strictly for inventory. Every year, on January 21st, he had to audit the cold case evidence locker. Evidence box number 404 sat open on the desk. Pritchard picked up the file. Case 94. B. Locals still whispered about the murders. 2 hikers found in a Subaru Outback exactly 20 years ago. No struggle, no footprints, just surgical incisions that removed specific organs. The killer hadn't left a single fingerprint. It was clean, but he had left one thing. Pritchard looked at the object on top of the manila folders. It was a Western Electric Model 500 rotary phone. Heavy, black, Bakelite plastic. It had been found in the back seat of the Subaru, unplugged. He popped a handful of David's sunflower seeds into his mouth. He just needed to log the item number and get back to patrol. Suddenly, the phone rang. Pritchard froze. A shell cracked loudly in his mouth. It wasn't a digital sound. It was the mechanical violence of metal bells striking each other inside the plastic casing. He checked his iPhone. Black screen. He checked the station landline. No lights. Ringing filled the small room, bouncing off the metal filing cabinets. Impossible, Pritchard whispered. He stood up and leaned over the desk. The thick, curly black cord trailed out of the base. It lay flat on the desk. It was cut. Copper wires frayed at the end, sticking out like dead nerves. It wasn't plugged into a wall jack. It wasn't plugged into anything. Physics didn't work like this. You need electricity to ring a mechanical bell. Pritchard felt the hair on his arm stand up. His instincts screamed at him to run, but the noise demanded an answer. He reached out. The handset felt like a block of ice. He lifted it. Silence. Blackwood Station, Pritchard said, his voice tight. Ranger Pritchard speaking. Static hiss was non-existent. Just dead air. Who is this? He barked. Help, a voice whispered. It sounded wet, like someone talking with a mouthful of water. Pritchard gripped the phone. State your emergency. Help. Me. Then breathing started. It was slow. It had a wet rattle like a crushed lung, and it wasn't coming from the earpiece. Pritchard pulled the phone away. He looked at the receiver. The breathing got louder. It was coming from the air vent directly above his head. Pritchard dropped the phone. It clattered onto the desk, knocking over the coffee cup. Sticky liquid spilled across the case file. He drew his Sig Sauer and spun around. He aimed at the ceiling vent. It was a standard metal grate, painted white. He heard the sound of a large man exhaling in a tight space. "Sheriff's Department!" Pritchard yelled. "Come out!" Breathing stopped instantly. Silence returned. The only sound was coffee dripping onto the floor. Pritchard backed up until he hit the evidence locker door. He grabbed the handle. Locked. He had locked it from the inside. He fumbled with the deadbolt and stumbled out into the dark hallway. He grabbed his maglite and switched it on. The beam cut through the darkness. He swept it left, then right. Empty. He moved toward the utility closet to check the breakers. As he passed the men's bathroom, he stopped. He smelled something sharp, metallic, like old pennies, copper, blood. He pushed the bathroom door open with his gun barrel. He swept the light to the sink. A single drop of red liquid hit the porcelain. Pritchard aimed the light up. The acoustic ceiling tile above the sink was shifted. A gap of blackness showed in the grid. He stepped back. He wasn't a SWAT team. He was one guy with a flashlight. He sprinted for the front exit. He hit the push bar of the glass doors with his full weight. They didn't budge. Pritchard shone his light through the glass. A thick silver chain was wrapped around the exterior handles, padlocked tight. Someone had locked him in. From the back of the station, a sound echoed. Click, whir, click. The rotary phone was being dialed. Pritchard vaulted over the reception desk. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, Unit 4. Intruder at Blackwood Station. Send backup." "Unit 4. Copy." The voice on the radio was deep, distorted. "Unit 4, is the phone plugged in?" Pritchard threw the radio against the wall. He aimed his gun down the hallway. The evidence room door creaked open. A shadow stretched out across the floor. It was too long to be human. "Show yourself!" Pritchard screamed. The shadow stopped. Then the back-loading dock door slammed shut with a massive boom. Pritchard didn't move for 20 minutes. He heard an old V8 engine start outside, rev once, and peel away. When he finally checked the evidence room, the door was wide open. The coffee puddle was still on the desk. The evidence box was empty. The phone was gone. In the middle of the sticky coffee spill, someone had drawn a smiley face with their finger. The mouth was upside down. Pritchard transferred to a city desk job 3 weeks later. He works in the impound lot now, but he still keeps his cell phone on silent. And if he's ever in a room with an old landline, he checks the wires. He has to make sure it's dead. Because he knows that sometimes a dead line is the only one that talks. Tennessee winters don't usually bite this hard. 72 hours ago, the temperature dropped to 10 below zero. It froze the mud on the trails into jagged concrete. Ranger Williams adjusted the collar of his uniform jacket. His breath came out in thick white puffs that vanished into the gray sky. He wasn't out here to enjoy the view. He and his partner, Miller, were patrolling Sector 4 near the Oliver Springs border. It was federal land, usually quiet, but a hiker had reported a bad smell near the ridgeline 3 days ago. "Radio is dead again," Miller said. Miller stood 10 feet away, tapping the side of his heavy Motorola walkie-talkie. He was a big guy, a 20-year veteran of the service, who took the job seriously. Williams checked his own gear. His Silver Ranger compass was spinning in slow, lazy circles. It was the magnetic anomaly everyone talked about in East Tennessee. The iron in the ground made navigation tools useless. You had to rely on landmarks and your gut. "Let's check that ridge," Williams said, pointing a gloved finger toward a cluster of dead pines. "If anyone is stuck out here, they'll be down there out of the wind." Walking through these woods felt like walking through a graveyard. No birds, no squirrels, just the crunch of frozen leaves under their government-issue boots. They moved down the slope, sliding on the ice until they found the rope. It was tied to an oak tree. It wasn't old, rotting hemp left by some hunter decades ago. It was yellow nylon. It was tied in a perfect sheepshank knot, a knot you use when you want to shorten a rope without cutting it. The rope trailed down a steep drop-off and disappeared into a vertical fissure in the limestone rock. Williams shined his light down the hole. "Looks like someone went down and didn't come up." "I'll anchor the line," Miller said, bracing his boots against a rock. "You check it out. I got your back." Williams checked the batteries in his 4-cell maglite and gripped the rope. He had a job to do. If a civilian was stuck down there, it was his duty to get them out. He lowered himself down, his boots scraping against the jagged rock walls. The air inside changed instantly. Up top, the air was crisp and odorless. Down here, the air was heavy. It was humid. It hit Williams in the face like a wet towel. He wrinkled his nose. It smelled like old copper pennies and wet, rotting paper. "I'm at the bottom," Williams called out. His voice echoed weirdly, bouncing off the damp walls. "Tossing a flare." He cracked a red chem light and tossed it forward. The red glow illuminated a small cavern, maybe 10 feet wide. But it wasn't empty. In the center of the cave floor was a pile of fabric. Williams stepped closer, his heavy boots squishing into soft mud. He shined his maglite on the pile. It was a nest. It wasn't made of leaves or animal fur. It was made of sleeping bags, old ones. He saw the faded patches on the green fabric, Girl Scout merit badges from the 1980s. They were shredded and woven together to make a bed. Williams felt the hair on his arms stand up. This wasn't a camper. This was something else. He knelt down to get a better look. Next to the sleeping bags, sitting on a flat rock, was a wrapper. He picked it up. It was wax paper from the Oliver Springs diner. Inside was half a ham sandwich. Williams froze. It was 10 degrees below zero outside. Everything on the mountain was frozen solid. Even the water in his canteen had ice in it. He touched the bread. It was soft. He rubbed the wax paper between his fingers. The grease was fresh. It was slick and wet. Someone had been eating this sandwich 10 minutes ago. "Miller," Williams whispered, reaching for his shoulder mic. "Miller, get ready. We have a 1096 down here. Suspect is close." No answer. Williams scanned the nest again. He saw something white tucked into a crack in the rock wall. He reached out and pulled it loose. It was a stack of photos, Polaroids. He flipped the first one over. It was a picture of a Jeep, a CJ7, his CJ7. It was parked in his driveway, snow covering the hood. The photo had been taken from the tree line of his own backyard. He checked the date written in marker on the bottom. 2 days ago. He flipped to the next photo. It was him. He was asleep in his recliner, taken through his living room window. He wasn't the ranger. He wasn't the hunter. He was the project. Click. A sound echoed from the back of the cave. It was sharp and metallic. It sounded like the safety coming off a rifle or a heavy tool hitting rock. Williams spun around, raising his heavy maglite. "Federal officer! Show yourself!" He didn't see a face. He didn't see a monster. He just saw a blur of motion from the shadows. Before he could swing the heavy flashlight, something hard slammed into the base of his skull. Pain exploded behind his eyes. His knees hit the mud. He tried to reach for his belt, for his service weapon, but his arms wouldn't listen. He fell forward, his cheek pressing into the shredded sleeping bags. His radio keyed up on his shoulder. He could hear the static hissing. Then he heard breathing. Heavy, rhythmic breathing coming through the speaker. It was his own breathing, being broadcast back to him. Then the world turned gray, and then black. Light burned his eyes. Williams gasped, sitting up straight. He wasn't in the cave. He was on a canvas cot. The air smelled sharp, iodine, diesel fumes from a generator, and the chemical sting of smelling salts. "Easy, Ranger, easy." A paramedic in a heavy jacket pushed him back down. He looked around wildly. He was in a medical tent. The flap was open, showing the dark woods outside and the flashing lights of a rescue truck. "Miller?" Williams croaked. "Right here, partner." Miller stepped into the light. He looked terrible. His uniform was torn, his face was scratched, and his boots were caked in thick gray cave mud. He looked like he had gone 10 rounds with a bear. "You took a nasty hit," Miller said, his voice shaking a little. "I heard you go down. I dropped in. Whoever hit you, he was fast. He slipped into the lower tunnels before I could get a shot off. I hauled you out." Williams nodded, relief washing over him. "Thanks, Miller." "We found someone else down there," Miller said quietly. He pointed to the corner. Sarah Monahan was sitting on a metal stool. She was wrapped in a gray wool blanket. She was maybe 20 years old, a troop leader. Her face was pale and she was shivering, but she was awake. The shock was fading. "Sarah?" Williams asked gently. She looked up. Her eyes were red. "My girls," she whispered. We were just trying to get the winter survival badge. That's all we wanted." "Where are they, Sarah?" Miller asked. He knelt beside her. "Where is the rest of the troop?" Sarah closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, fighting the tears. "The man, he took them deeper. He kept saying they needed to be in position. He kept talking about the geometry of the rocks." She pointed a shaking hand toward the map on the table. "He took them to the Hexagon, the rock formation past the ridge. He said the shape had to be perfect." Williams and Miller didn't wait. They geared up, grabbed fresh lights, and headed back out into the freezing dark. They followed Sarah's directions. 2 miles past the cave, deep in a section of the woods that wasn't on the tourist maps, they found the clearing. It was a geological oddity. 6 large limestone pillars stood in a perfect natural hexagon. The wind howled through them like a flute. Williams shined his light into the center of the formation. "Oh God," Miller whispered. "They found them, 5 of them." They were all wearing their sashes. They were sitting in a circle, facing outward, their backs touching. They looked peaceful, almost like they were sleeping. The frost had settled on their hair and eyelashes, making them look like statues made of ice. In the center of their circle, placed carefully on the frozen ground, was a single patch. It was the Winter Survival Badge. They brought the bodies down the mountain, but as Williams looked back at the tree line, he knew the truth about this place. Every year in the U.S., 600,000 people are reported missing. Most are found, but the Appalachians are different. These mountains are 480 million years old, and they don't care about rescue parties. They have hollows so deep, the sun only hits the bottom for 2 hours a day, and limestone walls that create acoustic shadows where no one can hear you scream. Statistics show that 41% of hikers vanish because they stepped just 5 feet off the trail to explore. That's all it takes to slip into a navigation dead zone. The National Park Service keeps a list of names, but the forest doesn't. Once you step past that tree line, you aren't a hiker anymore. You're just biology returning to the soil. Those 5 girls? They weren't just victims of a man. They were claimed by the landscape. In these mountains, missing isn't a status. It's an outcome.